They always looked at her the way sunlight looks at a garden. Hungry. Approving. Certain. I learned to live in the shadow of that light. My name is Quinn. I was 28 when the house I grew up in, Maple Hollow's neat clapboard on Sycamore Lane, became the stage for the final act of a family play I never auditioned for. My parents, Evelyn and Robert Hale, were pillars in town. Evelyn with her charity committees and perfect lipstick, Robert with the steady accountant's numbers and the small, polite applause of clients who trusted him with ledgers and secrets. They built our life like a postcard. White porch, carved railing, the kind of potato salad summer where the neighbors wave and nobody notices the cracks. Only I saw the cracks. My sister Hannah was 4 years older, effortless and amber. She collected accolades like others collected postcards. Honors, scholarships, leadership positions. If life had a spotlight, it starred Hannah and everyone else. Especially my parents, orbited around her glow. Me? I was the margin note. Cute. Helpful. Never the headline. I tried to be the headline. I practiced piano until my wrists ached, spent nights sketching invitations, joined clubs, smiled when they praised Hannah. Always smiling. I once won an art contest in 3rd grade and Evelyn glanced at the ribbon like it was an afterthought. Cute, she said, but Hannah took first in math. The words lodged into me like a seed. I watered that seed with every apology, every quiet correction, hoping it would bloom into belonging. By high school I had learned the choreography of staying small. If I laughed too loud, Evelyn told me to tone it down. If I offered an idea at the dinner table, Robert would nod toward Hannah. Let her handle it, he'd say, and their smiles would fold around her like a banner. When Hannah got accepted to a top business program, Maple Hollow threw a party. Evelyn posted pictures, perfect captions, perfect lighting. Robert drove her to campus, beaming. I stayed behind at the community college, and took shifts covering the accounting firm's front desk, answering phones in between lectures. Family first, they said, as if the phrase could mend everything it masked. I fell in love with marketing in a small agency 2 towns over. It felt like my thing. Sharp ideas, late-night brainstorming, the thrill of a client who finally got. I rented a tiny 2nd-floor apartment 3 blocks from home. Small freedom. My parents called it convenient. They called it available. When Hannah decided to get married, I was the one who volunteered. I believed, with the kind of foolish faith that is both brave and naive, that planning her wedding might finally rewrite the script. I negotiated with caterers late into the night. I sketched place cards until my eyes blurred, hunted ribbon in 2 counties and chose peonies because Hannah once thumbed a magazine and said she liked them. I spent money from that marketing conference fund, $2,000 on a necklace with a small sapphire because maybe finally they'd say good job Quinn. Everything I did was deliberate. Every choice a quiet plea for validation. The week before the wedding I lived inside checklists. The DJ's set, the florist's delivery, the seating plan. My world shrank to a binder fat with timelines and contracts. Evelyn hovered with a smile that tasted like critique. Robert skimmed through documents with the same detached authority he used on balance sheets. Don't mess this up, he muttered once, looking at me like I had misplaced a decimal point. On the day before the rehearsal, I carried a box of centerpieces, delicate glass orbs I'd sourced for weeks, up the steps to their kitchen. I remember the way the sun cut through the window, a strip of brightness across hardwood. I remember the weight of the box in my arms, the exact way the lid sat crooked. One of the orbs was missing. I hadn't broken it. I'd left the last box at my apartment after a sleepless night and 1,000 tiny errands. Before I could explain, Evelyn's eyes narrowed. Where's the rest of the decorations? She snapped. The words hit like a thrown dish. You forgot? Robert said from the couch. His voice was flat, like a closing ledger. Panic rose in my throat. I left 1 box, I'll go get it. Evelyn cut me off with a hand on the counter. The gesture small but absolute. You're always screwing things up. This is Hannah's wedding, not a school project. Hannah stood near the stairs with her fiancé, Ethan, both casually dressed, distant as a photograph. I looked to her for the last faint thing I'd wanted, a rescue. She didn't meet my eyes, and then they said it. The sentence that would become a canyon between us. The greatest gift you could give for your sister's wedding, Evelyn said, her voice ice, would be if you disappeared from our family permanently. Robert nodded. You don't belong here. The floor dropped. There was sound plates clinking, the faint radio in the other room, but everything thinned down to the certainty in those sentences, years of quiet corrections, of being edited out, compressed into a single sharpened verdict. I set the box down. Fine. My voice was steady, a foreign calm. You'll get your wish. I walked out. I slammed the door in a way that made the house itself inhale. I drove to my apartment and sat in the dim living room until night braided itself across the window. It was the only time I can remember feeling pure clarity, stripped of the ache and the pleading. If they wanted me gone, I would make it not for punishment, not for revenge, at least not in the way they expected, but to save the person who had spent her life being small in the hope of being loved. That night I watched the live stream of the wedding on a shaky phone camera. Hannah glowed. Evelyn laughed. Robert raised his glass as if the house had been mended by erasure. I did not weep. I only felt the iron of something settling inside me. The choice was made. I would disappear to become someone else. You don't vanish without logistics. Life has friction, bills, leases, bank accounts, small realities that anchor you to a place. I dismantled them with intention. I called in a personal day from work. My boss accepted without surprise, as if he'd expected my sudden break. I found a real estate agent, Eleanor Shaw, who cut through niceties for cash offers and quick closings. I met a lawyer I'd once bumped into at a networking mixer, Laura Kent, who listened without pity and mapped out the legal tidiness of a clean exit. Freezing shared accounts is the safest move, Laura said, pen poised. Set up a trust, protect the funds for their intended medical and household needs. If you withdraw anything precipitously, it looks like theft, not escape. I didn't want to appear criminal. I wanted to be careful, surgical. So I did what any sensible person does before burning a life down. I safeguarded a remnant of it. I met Marcus Hale, no relation, a financial attorney with a calm voice, who agreed to create a trust with a third-party administrator. The accounts that Evelyn and Robert had used as a family safety net were mostly filled by years of my contributions for Evelyn's pills, for repairs, for groceries, little donations here and there that had been bitten into by the family habit of asking and receiving. Marcus froze the accounts, set criteria for withdrawals, and told me let them try. Paperwork always beats drama. I resigned from the firm with polite sentences about personal reasons. 9 years ended in 10 minutes. The emotional purge was harder than lifting boxes. I boxed up only a few things. My laptop, a battered sketchbook, a sapphire necklace from an old art teacher, who once told me, "You paint from a place most people don't notice." Everything else, furniture, the couch I'd saved for, went to charity or to a quick sale. The apartment felt like a costume I no longer wanted to wear. I picked Harbor's Edge, South Carolina. The name felt like deliberate poetry, a town on marsh and salt air far from the neat clapboard of Maple Hollow. I signed the lease under my middle name, Quinn Lane Parker, less subterfuge than a small margin between past and present. A weathered cottage with creaky floors, a leaky faucet, and a porch that faced a ribbon of marshland was mine for month-to-month rent. It was imperfect, and I liked. Laura drafted the trust documents. Marcus set up new accounts. I sold the apartment at a price below what it was worth, trading equity for speed. "You'll take a hit," Eleanor had said, folding the closing papers, "but you'll be freedom tastes like salt air and cardboard boxes in the back seat of a car." I drove south on Interstate 95, with 2 suitcases and a radio full of songs I didn't have to explain. I paid cash, keeping one old phone switched on for emergencies and tucking the other away like a relic. The first week in Harbor's Edge blurred. Cheap motels, $2 diner coffee, a seaside breeze that felt like forgiveness. I walked past shops with hand-painted signs and met Rosa Vale at Salt and Bean, the cafe by the dock. She had hair like salt spray, and a laugh that wasn't stingy with comfort. "New face," she said, sliding a coffee across. "Town's kind to people who want to start over." 3 weeks in, a notification stabbed into my pocket like a splinter. Evelyn had gone public. A local community page, Maple Hollow Matters, was aflutter with a post, accusing me of taking family money and sabotaging Hannah's wedding. Evelyn's words were earnest in the way polished lies are. "My daughter abandoned us in our time of need," she wrote, "and disappeared with family savings. They called me a thief." Robert commented about betrayal. Hannah sent a private message, "You didn't have to abandon us like that." The quiet in that message was worse than any anger. It was the sound of a person choosing comfort over truth. Marcus checked the trust for me. The freeze stood. Withdrawals with no documentation were denied. When Evelyn attempted to take out thousands for wedding repairs and emergencies, the third-party administrator asked for invoices. They couldn't provide them. The safer the legal structure, the harder it was for their fiction to take hold. I did not respond to Evelyn's posts, or Robert's comments. I did not call Hannah back. Silence was a language I had never used before. It became my shield. In Harbor's Edge I rebuilt in small, stubborn ways. I became Elaine Parker online, a freelance designer and copywriter. I worked under my middle name for privacy, but not anonymity. Client emails came in. A small local business asked for a rebrand. Another needed social media. I painted again in the mornings, the brush smoothing a place inside me that had been furred with doubt. Rosa lent me the kind of listening that doesn't pry. "Folks here keep their own maps," she said. "You'll be fine. Just don't look back unless you plan on moving back." but the past is persistent. Evelyn and Robert ran the narrative in Maple Hollow like a leash. Public outrage, neighbor gossip, the local paper with an oblique article quoting Evelyn's hurt. I forwarded the hate mail to Marcus. He drafted a statement, short and clinical, about the trust and the fact that the money was being used for medical and household expenses. Let them dig their own hole, he said. The truth's on your side. They dug. There is a moment after you choose yourself where the world tests whether the choice will hold. For me, that test came with a smear campaign and a jolt of revelation. Evelyn escalated. She posted a screenshot of a bank transfer with my name redacted, implying I had routed family money into my own accounts. The insinuation turned neighbors into prosecutors. Marcus and Laura responded with legal letters sent to the paper and to Evelyn's attorney, insisting the trust held strict disbursement rules, and that the funds were intact. The paper ran a cautious headline: familiar names, unfamiliar entries, local firm under review. The social wave ebbed for a few days. Then something else happened. A local friend, Clara from Maple Hollow, sent me a private message with a photo attached, a faded receipt and a spreadsheet. This looked weird, she wrote. I found it in a box of old office files at the community center event prep. Thought you should see it. I opened the photo with a hand that trembled in a way I hadn't given myself permission to do. The receipt was for a consulting fee, a line item that didn't match any public explanation Evelyn had given. The spreadsheet column showed client funds moved through an account that used Evelyn's initials as a reference. My chest flattened. You could call it confirmation bias. Or you could call it the moment the world finally tilted. Marcus asked me to forward everything. I sent the photo and another message. If this is real, don't involve me in vigilante justice. Let the paper and the lawyers do their jobs. He did. Laura filed a subpoena for the firm's client accounts. Private audit, forensic accounting. The small town of Maple Hollow, with its neat porches and polite silences, suddenly had a ledger with teeth. The audit found discrepancy. Client funds had been moved into an account labeled charity that paid for things that matched Evelyn's shopping receipts, boutique dresses, hotel charges, a deposit on a timeshare. There were also transfers into accounts associated with vendors who turned out to be shell companies. It was the sort of messy arithmetic that only a forensic accountant could love. Money moved here, then there, slightly off, repeatedly, not grand larceny, but mismanagement, and a pattern of hiding expenses under the cloak of community outreach. Robert's name appeared in the audit emails, because of course the family ledger was open to him. He had signed off on some of the entries. When the board of the accounting firm convened, they found the trail undeniable. The local paper ran a cautious headline: familiar names, unfamiliar entries, local firm under review. Evelyn issued a statement about clerical errors. Robert offered a tight-lipped apology for miscommunication. Hannah posted nothing. It was not revenge I had planned. I had only wanted my life back. But watching the truth come to light was a kind of strange, cold vindication. The town that had nodded and smiled had to look more closely. People who had trusted Evelyn as a pillar, read footers and questioned invoices they had never questioned before. Public consequences trailed private ones. The firm's client base thinned. A few long-time clients moved their accounts. A state regulator called for a formal review. Evelyn's committee invitations shriveled. People who once accepted her perfect postcards began to ask for itemized lists. When the regulator requested documentation, Evelyn's explanations frayed. I did not gloat. The relief I felt was small and complicated, threaded with guilt. I was grieving a family that had been a fiction, and a real set of losses nonetheless, but I was no longer wrung out by the need to be visible to them. Hannah finally spoke, sort of. An article quoted her. I'm stunned, she wrote. Family is complicated. The public language of her sentence made a small star twinkle and then vanished. She reached out privately with an email whose subject line read, "Can we talk?" Her words were threaded with apology and assumptions. I didn't know, she wrote. I'm sorry you felt unsupported. And then when Laura requested a list of Hannah's communications with the firm, emails, approvals, invoices tied to the wedding, she discovered a thread. Hannah had indeed signed some vendor approvals remotely. She had replied with quick, distracted phrases. Looks fine, do what you think. She had not been a conspirator. She had been someone whose passivity had functioned as tacit permission. She hadn't spoken up at the table because she was busy building the life Evelyn adored. Hannah was not a villain, so much as a person whose absence had been a choice. The revelation cut more deeply than any public accusation. I had expected the showdown to be a clash of swords. Instead, it was a slow unpeeling. People who loved the surface were asked to see the underworkings. Those who had performed for the town's applause had to explain the legend. After the audit, Evelyn's social calendar dried. The charity drive she coordinated required tighter accounting. The firm dissolved into a scandal-soaked quiet. The neighbors who once praised her began to ask for itemized lists. When the regulator requested documentation, Evelyn's explanations frayed. I watched from harbor's edge as their world narrowed. They called me a thief until the ledger said otherwise. That public unmasking was not mine to take credit for. It was the legal systems and the town's slow unwillingness to let comfort trump scrutiny. Reconstruction felt different in harbor's edge. My freelance business grew in small increments. Logos that turned into packages, social campaigns that turned into retainers. I hung a small show at the harbor's edge library. Paintings that held the marsh in the way. Memory holds a wound. Landscapes with negative space where family should have been. I called the series The Missing Box. On opening night I watched a crowd of strangers read my work and paused. One woman older came up and touched a brushstroke like a benediction. "It's brave," she said, "that you left. Sometimes revenge is simpler than spectacular." In the months that followed, people reached out. Old friends, clients of the firm seeking clarification, neighbors who had known me as a polite shadow. Many expressed regret. A few offered apologies that were late, but sincere. Hannah sent a final email. "I'm sorry for everything." I read it twice, then archived it. The person who wrote it was as much a stranger as the town that had cheered her on. If there is an act of revenge one can claim without malice, it is this. A life rebuilt with the pieces you weren't given. I told myself quietly, like a promise, to let the law do the loud work and to spend my energy on the small, stubborn work of being alive. So I painted. I took freelance gigs that paid in deadlines and compliments, not conditional affection. I learned the shape of errands in a town where nobody knew my family's names. I made friends who listened without tallying my mistakes. The fallout in Maple Hollow settled into a new normal, fewer invitations, awkward greetings at the grocery store, Evelyn's absence at the charity luncheons that once felt like coronation. The firm's review became a limping public spectacle. Regulators asked questions, clients asked for audits, and the polite applause thinned into muttered curiosity. People who had once accepted their surface began reading footers and receipts. Hannah reached out again, this time with a longer email that tried to stitch apology into explanation. She wrote about how busy she'd been, how she hadn't been paying attention, how she'd been building a life that never asked for receipt. I read the words and felt something complicated, a small relief that she saw the damage, and a clear boundary that what she could offer now wouldn't rewrite the past. I didn't need spectacle. I needed boundaries, solid, non-negotiable things that keep a life from sliding back into the old grooves. I replied once, brief and honest. "I'm glad you see it, but I've already started building a life where I'm not waiting for you. I won't step back into the role you assigned me." That morning after I hit send, I stood on my cottage porch and watched the marsh breathe mist into the horizon. The sky held the kind of pale the city never gives you. A slow, generous light. I felt light, not victorious the way people say the word when they want to be dramatic. Just steadier, more myself. The town's examination of Evelyn's books did something else I hadn't anticipated. It loosened the script everyone else had been playing from. Neighbors who once mimicked Evelyn's tidy moral voice began to ask for documentation for their own charities. The local paper printed a follow-up about transparency and nonprofit accounting. Small systems shifted because one house's secrets could no longer hide behind a well-staged life. And yet consequences for them were not the same as my healing. They lost status and invitations. I gained silence and space. I learned that vindication is not a roar but a slow writing. Months later, Harbor's Edge felt like home in a way Maple Hollow never had. I painted a new series, Landscapes, where the negative space sat like a held breath. I titled the show Small Freedoms. People came, they bought canvases. A local boutique asked me to design window displays. I took on a steady client who paid reliably and trusted my instinct. My bank account grew in non-dramatic, healthy increments. I slept through storms without checking to see if anyone had called. One evening at a gallery opening, a woman I'd met in the cafe, Rosa, leaned in and said, "You ever think about going back?" I told her no. Not because I held bitterness as a trophy, but because going back would mean shrinking to fit someone else's grief. It would mean stepping back into a role that carved me into pieces. I'd left to become whole. There were small private triumphs that filled the space where their praise used to be. I answered a client call without my stomach nodding. I splurged on bus tickets to visit a friend in a city that smelled like opportunity. I sent a painting to an old art teacher with a note. "You were right." I painted from a place people miss. Sometimes people asked how I'd done it, how I had the courage to leave a house, to sell an apartment below market, to sign leases under my middle name. I would tell them there was no single courage moment, only 1,000 small acts of choosing myself, packing a box, calling a lawyer, saying no to calls that sounded like traps, turning down guilt that had been weaponized for decades. Each act was tiny, but together they formed an abutment strong enough to hold a light. When the regulator closed the firm's investigation months later, it was neither theatrical nor satisfying in the way a movie ending might be. There were fines, reprimands, forced audits, tidy paper consequences, but also raw real-world fallout, lost clients, friendships that frayed into silence, a reputation that would not stitch itself back overnight. Evelyn made statement. She released an apology that read like an accountant trying to sound like a penitent. The town moved on in the only way small towns do, slowly with new rules and new gossip. I watched it all from the porch of my weathered cottage while sipping coffee that had never tasted like approval. I felt relief and a strange grief for what might have been an easier family, a different kind of home. But grief didn't mean I'd failed. It meant I'd loved people who couldn't reciprocate the way I needed them to. The last time Hannah called, I didn't pick up. Her voicemail asked for a meeting, for tea, for a chance to explain her silence. I let it sit. I saved the message because I believed in being honest with myself. I might be open one day but not on their timeline, not when the conversation started with obligation. My life now is not dramatic. It's made of clients' invoices, and paint-stained t-shirts, and long walks on the marsh where the tide sets the pace. It's a life where my work is seen without apology, and my worth is not measured by someone else's spotlight. That is the quiet revenge, the reclamation that matters most. If you ask me what I would have done differently, I'd say one thing: I would have left sooner, not because I wanted to punish them, but because every year I stayed I gave away hours I could have spent building something true. I vanished not to prove anything to them, but to prove to myself that I could be enough on my own. The missing box that once felt like a funeral became, in hindsight, a key. It unlocked a life where I decide the terms, where I don't trade my peace for someone else's image of perfection. Sometimes leaving is the kindest revenge, the only way to show people what they lose when they mistake control for love.